Okay, what is up everyone, Prometheus here. Today I'm going to be talking about Napoleon. Now when I say Napoleon, I don't mean just the movie, I also mean like the history behind the historical figure of, well, you know who Napoleon is, the Emperor of France, the most powerful man to ever, the most powerful French person to ever live, the man who dominated over Europe in a great war as he built his empire. But today I would like to talk about two movies, Napoleon and Napoleon. This Napoleon, and I'll get to the other one afterwards. So, don't mind the mess. But Napoleon was released in 1927 and was at the time the largest largest movie in the world. Like, when I say large, I mean like the largest production. The film was 5.5. It says 3 hours 55, but it's actually 5.5 hours long, and was at the time the longest film in the industry. And it had one of the most impressive. It was extremely impressive for the time it was released. Like, absolutely, just, it was amazing. They had great shots. They had great techniques. I'll go over them. So the main thing that I liked is just how large scale it was. There were dozens, maybe hundreds of different actors filming in these large battle scenes. Like, it was the first true historical epic at the time. Sorry, I had to cut away for a second there. Let's get back to the video. So, as I was saying, Napoleon, this film has great techniques put into it. I'll give you an example. There's a scene where they are riding horses. Well, yeah, there's a battle scene where there's a large army riding on horses. You know how they captured this battle scene? The camera follows them as they ride their horses across the battlefield. You know how they captured that? They strapped they had the cameraman sit on a horse and ride while recording them, or strapped a camera to the horse, which is just absolutely impressive. Do you see people doing that today? In fact, I don't think they did stuff like, not many directors did stuff like that in the following decades during the golden age of Hollywood. Another example, in a scene with young Napoleon getting into a snowball fight, they throw a snowball and there's a first-person perspective of the snowball. What they did is they put the camera inside the snowball, or attached to the snowball, and threw it, and they kind of had a first-person perspective as it hits this kid in the face, which is also very impressive for the time. They, like, absolutely just stunning work done on this film. And at the time, it was like the best movie in the world at the time. Like, and how could I talk about Napoleon 1927 without talking about the epic tri-screen battle? In the final battle, what they did, since they were a bit limited at the time, this film still obviously shows the limitations. It didn't have any audio. It was black and white. Well, it also had some other colors in it too. But what they did for the final battle, since they couldn't capture the full battle on one small screen, what they did is they captured this battle onto 3 full movie theater screens and displayed it on 3 full movie theater screens, which each played the footage simultaneously, each connecting to create this full-scale battle scene. And that is just absolutely impressive. Even today, a film nearly 100 years old still feels super impressive. Like, they didn't have much, but when you have less, you tend to create more because you put more work and devotion into something. When you have less resources, how do you think Tony Stark created the Iron Man suit in that cave? He had less, but he managed to create something great. But we're not talking about Marvel, we're talking about Napoleon. So, the first true historical epic, and still one of the greatest epics ever made. Like, sure, it's definitely not on the same level as Sergei Bondarchuk's War and Peace, which also is about Napoleon's invasion of Russia during his reign. But this one is, I think this also kind of brings that up. Napoleon isn't really the most prominent character in War and Peace, whereas in this film, he is front and full center, the main character. And it's just absolutely magnificent. Like, the film may be 5.5 hours long, but you can sit through it, entertained the whole time. Like, it may be old, but at the same time, it feels timeless. It's a timeless, epic masterpiece. And as you can see, it got really good review scores. Like, a film near 97 years old, I think, around 97, and yet it still manages to impress. That's absolutely crazy. Like when compared to War and Peace, sure, it's War and Peace dwarfs the size of this film for sure, and yeah, there's definitely some aspects of this film that obviously haven't aged too well. Like obviously, like it's silent, its footage isn't the best, the most high resolution. It's a 1920s film. What do you expect? I'm not taking away points for that, but it's still an older film. But at the same time, it feels timeless, and this film, its 5.5 hour runtime allows it to go over the entire life of Napoleon. Speaking of the entire life of Napoleon, that's a good time to bring up Stanley Kubrick's Napoleon, which sadly never got made. So Stanley Kubrick was going to be making his historical epic and what could have been his greatest film and possibly even the greatest movie of all time. Yes, maybe even better than Sergei Bondarchuk's War and Peace. That's saying a lot because Sergei Bondarchuk's War and Peace, or just War and Peace, again, not to get it confused with this War and Peace, which has a 50% compared to Sergei Bondarchuk's, which has an astounding score of 100%. No, I am, of course, talking about that War and Peace. Whenever I bring up War and Peace in my videos, I'm, of course, talking about Sergei Bondarchuk's, not the 1956 Hollywood one. All these films in this box added up would be a lot of money, but I'm not selling them because I feel these films are worth more to me than any price could buy. But anyways, back to the film. Stanley Kubrick, they did eventually find his script for it in the Hollywood archives, but still, Kubrick didn't want them to make the film. So instead, like, he never ended up making the film, which is sad. And yes, they will be making the film into a TV show. Spielberg is making a epic, large scale historical epic TV show based on his Stanley Kubrick script. But even then, I don't think it would be as good as it would have been if it was directed by Stanley Kubrick. Like, don't get me wrong, Spielberg's an amazing director, one of the greatest of all time, but Stanley Kubrick's style is just something else. Like, the style of this film, like, it was truly ahead of its time, and easily the best movie of the 1920s, and one of the all-time greatest films. Like, you watch this film, and you just think to yourself, how did they pull this off in 1927? Now, I'm also going to be talking about the history of Napoleon, but Napoleon, you all know him, I myself am French. I, of course, have to talk about Napoleon, and I'm proud to be French. Like, I don't live in France, but just because I don't live in my nation doesn't mean I'm not a part of it. Like, nation isn't the country, like the land. It's more so the people. We all belong to a certain ethnicity or culture or language. We are French. I'm not full French. I'm also French, Filipino, Canadian, because I live in Canada. It's kind of a mix, but who knows. But I'm proud to be both French and Filipino. And France has rich culture. Their food is great. Some people may criticize the country, and you know what? It's not a perfect nation. It was definitely not a perfect nation when Napoleon was around, and Napoleon, he's a pretty divisive figure. Some people see him as an absolute hero who led one of the largest empires in European history. Others see him as a monster who slaughtered millions of people after the French Revolution, which had already killed many people, including the King and Queen of France, who did have it coming. I did discuss the French Revolution in the previous video. I took a little detour to kind of talk about that, because I am kind of a history buff as well. But anyways, so Napoleon, the War and Peace doesn't really talk about Napoleon, or more so, it's more so about Napoleon's invasion of Russia at the time. I don't think he's a really prominent character in the movie. More so, there's 300 different characters in the film. I'm talking about War and Peace, not Napoleon. But then this film, Napoleon's the main character, full front, full center. He's the main character of this film. Now, another film I'd like to talk about is also Napoleon. However, this is a recent one. If you know which one I'm talking about, I am, of course, talking about Ridley Scott's 2023 historical epic, also Napoleon. And as you can see, this one was not as successful, holding a pretty, yeah. Some people really criticized it for being kind of how they portrayed Napoleon. Some calling it like they didn't do him justice, and just that they had so much more resources to make this an absolute epic, and it still was impressive film, but yeah, kind of other aspects kind of held it down a bit to make it like an absolute masterpiece. Unlike a film made nearly 100 years earlier, it's managed like how did they manage? How can a film made nearly 100 years ago manage to top a film about the same person made today? You think, oh, we'd have so much more resources. Our superior filming technology today would make this an absolute, like, just like a modern classic that would absolutely dwarf the size of the original film made 100 years ago, and they had less. But no, they didn't manage to make it as impressive as a film made nearly 100 years ago, because no, CGI. They didn't have hundreds or even thousands of actors, because we have the gift of CGI, but at the same time I feel like CGI can be a curse, because then people over rely on it and forget about what makes film film. Film is something you should be dedicated to, something you should pour hard work into making art. And I don't think Napoleon's an absolutely terrible film. This film it's more like a 6 out of 10, but it's definitely a big embarrassment when compared to the original Napoleon. And I think the Napoleon TV show based off Stanley Kubrick's script being made with Steven Spielberg, I think that's going to be a great TV show. Though I don't think it could live up to what the original film could have. I mean, it could possibly top Napoleon 1927. And what they did with Napoleon, like, Stanley Kubrick and the crew put so much work into making the Napoleon movie before canceling it. What they did is they had information on every single day of Napoleon's life. They had, like, files describing every aspect of. They wanted to make this as accurate and, like, significant, historically accurate, and just masterfully told story about Napoleon. And then Kubrick decided to scrap it. I don't know why, because he could have created the greatest film of all time. It's disappointing. Now, I think this new Napoleon show coming out with Steven Spielberg, it could be one of the best historical shows out there, for sure. Like, Spielberg is one of the all-time greatest directors. Like, right up there with Kubrick, for sure. But, like, I don't know how people can recapture films made, like, this film was made nearly 100 years ago, and yet it doesn't recapture the essence. Like, I mean, this film was made nearly 100 years ago, and yet people still haven't been able to recapture. Like, you'd think it'd be easy to recreate something made 100 years ago with less when we have even more, but no. People rely on CGI, and they don't care about making quality films. They don't care about making, like, putting work in. As long as they can make money from it, then they don't care. Oh, like, look at Disney. They don't care if their movies are, well, I'm being a bit harsh on Disney, but yeah, they clearly are doing it for money sometimes, like with all the sequels and remakes. Like, don't get me wrong, I think sequels can be good, but then you gotta make 5 Toy Story films. Like, is that just for money? Same thing with video game corporations who just pour in so many microtransactions and DLCs and stuff that don't get me wrong, DLCs can be good. Look at Shadow of the Earth Tree, that was amazing. But enough about video games, more on movies. Looking at these films really opened my eyes to how the film industry today isn't putting in as much effort. Like, don't get me wrong, Return of the King, Lord of the Rings trilogy, they put in a lot of effort. Like, sure, they use CGI, but they also balanced that CGI with impressive practical effects, and they did have many extra actors to film in the large battle scenes. That's something. And even then, those films are made over 20 years ago, and I still think they can't recreate those films. So if they can't recreate a film made nearly over 20 years ago, then they definitely cannot recreate the epics that inspired that film, made decades prior to that one. Like, Lord of the Rings feels like a historical epic, and a fantasy film combined, even though it's based off a book and not a real life thing. But I'll make a video on Lord of the Rings soon, enough more on Napoleon. So I did discuss a bit about Napoleon and how he expanded his empire, how he came into power. Check out part 2, how the French Revolution created the War and Peace movie, and I'll be making part 3 on kind of the cinematography and stuff. But with I guess I was being a bit more complex, drawing how the Russian like the Napoleonic War and invasion, like the French Revolution caused the Napoleonic Wars. The Napoleonic Wars eventually led to Napoleon's invasion of Russia, which inspired Tolstoy to write War and Peace, and that eventually led to War and Peace being made into a movie by Sergei Bondarchuk. So, in a sense, the French Revolution did lead to the creation of War and Peace. So, that's one good thing it did. But more in Napoleon, again, this film, like, you may think it's a bit crazy, that a bit like I might be wasting my time sitting through all these 3, 4, 5, 7 hour movies, but no, it's worth it because film is my passion. If I want to do anything in my life, like, of course I'm still gonna do this channel, but I also want to get somehow involved in the film industry. Like, I don't care if I'm just a cameraman or a screenwriter or even just an extra. I still want to get involved in the film industry. Like, maybe even just a film studies teacher would be amazing. I'd take that. Because then I can talk to kids, kind of discuss films with them, and I'd put on really long films. Like, you'd think, oh, people today, they can't handle. Like, a lot of people today don't really like to sit through films that are more than 2.5 hours long. Whereas back then, they had films nearly over 3.5 hours long, and they were fine with it. Like, I like my movies long. I like them long. Long and deep. Like, long and so many different layers to them. Layers that you can deconstruct, that you can analyze. That's what I like, how I like films. And they're, like, another film I'm going to be checking out soon is the Andrei Tarkovsky, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong, but I'm checking out Stalker, which holds an astounding 100% like War and Peace, and it's a Russian film. I think it might be about, like, Chernobyl, who knows, maybe inspired the Stalker video games, but I'll be checking it out, because I hear it's really good. Another film I might check out is Satan Tango, which is over 7.5 hours long, but I do not care, because it also has 100% on Rotten Tomatoes, so sounds like it'd be really good. And this film, checking out, it was amazing. They managed to put this together in the 1920s, and it still feels great. Like, it's absolutely timeless film. It's just amazing, like, how they put together a film of this just scale at the time is impressive. Like, the acting's great. Like, they don't talk but can still feel the actors. Like, don't get me wrong, Joaquin Phoenix actually gives a pretty good performance as Napoleon in this film. I don't think it's like a 50s movie. It's more like 60s, maybe a 7 out of 10. I haven't really seen the film, but I have seen clips of it, and it does display a really good, just absolute. It looks really good. It looked like it could be the best film of 2020. I think it was 2020. I forgot the year. 2023. It looked like it could have been the best film of last year, but it ended up being not really. It could have been. I mean, Oppenheimer was great. I do feel that the best film of last year for me was Boy and the Heron, because that's the only that film displays the absolute magic that can only be displayed in animation. And movies like Napoleon 1927, movies like Lawrence of Arabia, Ben-Hur, and of course Sergei Bondarchuk's War and Peace display the magic of historical epics and just filming as a whole. Now, more on the history part, another thing I didn't discuss in the previous video about the history of the Napoleonic Wars was the Battle of Waterloo, and what eventually led to the downfall of Napoleon. So, I believe it happened. The Battle of Waterloo happened in the June of 1813 or 14, and it was in Russia. But that battle eventually led to Napoleon's defeat. It was in Russia, so they failed to invade Russia, and I believe Battle of Waterloo is in the War and Peace movie, and is an absolute grand scale battle scene. So after that, Napoleon was exiled to the island of Elba from 1814 1815 until he died from 1815 from an ulcer, I believe. And there's a lot of art made by then. Him sitting down on the shores, gazing at the horizon, and just and a bunch of different quotes. Napoleon, like the Napoleon meme, was pretty big earlier this year, and I believe last year. Who knows? But yeah, it was Napoleon is a significant figure in human history. One of the one of the greatest. When I say greatest, I mean like he was one of the most powerful, influential people who ever lived in the world. Like the Napoleon Code influenced many modern day law systems in Europe, and he's still a significant figure in French history. Like whether you see him as a hero, a absolute monster who killed millions, or someone somewhere in between, I see him as something in between. But no matter how you see the Napoleon, he's still a large, influential, and powerful figure. Like he dominated over much of Europe and started wars against Austria, Prussia, Russia, Great Britain. Like it was an absolute, like his empire wasn't as large as something like the British Empire, and of course the Mongolian Empire, which is my personal favorite empire. Like I'm not saying that I supported it; they were pretty bad, like pretty vile and brutal, the Mongol Empire, but it's one that I'm most interested in. But Napoleon's empire was one that spanned all over Europe, showing his absolute power, his strategy. He was a strategist. He was a general. He was a military genius. And I believe these films kind of show that. Like this film, being over 5.5 hours long, does great at like just displaying Napoleon. Now, more on history, the Battle of Waterloo. I believe they made a Battle of Waterloo movie, which became popular in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets looked at that film and they wanted to prove themselves. Like I mentioned this previously, they wanted to prove themselves to the American film Hollywood that they can do better than that, and they did. They absolutely did with War and Peace, and the Stalker movie also looks like it can be really, really good. Like, I was really interested in American Hollywood. Like, obviously, there are many American Hollywood classics, but then there's also Japanese cinema, and that's absolutely amazing. Anime and samurai movies. There's also Indian Bollywood movies like Triple R, Kill, and Devara Part 1 coming out soon. Those are amazing, absurd action films, but they work so well. And I'm looking at more European, specifically Russian and Soviet movie projects, and they're absolutely amazing how they managed to pull things off. Like, obviously the Soviet Union was far from perfect. They killed millions of people with their communism. Like, look at Stalin. But they also put in a lot of work and dedication to their films, so that's one positive they have. And my point is that, like, film, when looking into film, you gotta look beyond just American Hollywood. You gotta look into other film around the world, because they also have amazing films. That's how I discovered the greatest movie of all time in War and Peace. Again, not the American one. I'm talking about Sergei Bondarchuk's one from 1966. And Stalker looks like it could be a film that might possibly be a competitor. Like, it looks absolutely stunning, and it could possibly compete with with War and Peace as as the greatest film of all time, like, or at least one of the top three, because it's absolutely amazing. Like, the films from Russia and the Soviet Union, they dwarf the size of American Hollywood. Like, don't get me wrong, there's absolutely just enormous American Hollywood films such as Ten Commandments, Ben-Hur, Gone with the Wind, and of course Lawrence of Arabia and Bridge on the River Kwai. And then there's amazing works of art such as The Godfather films, not Part 3. But the Soviet Union proved themselves, and they surpassed, and that's why Russian and Soviet movies, those classic ones, are starting to grow on me as some of my favorite film industry. Like, I'm so surprised that they don't really make too many films. I think they, I don't know, I haven't seen modern Russian films. I don't know if there's any like films on the same level as some of the Russian ones, such as Stalker, Solaris, which is also by and I think it was Andrew Tarkovsky. I don't know how to pronounce that. And then there's Sergei Bondarchuk. With War and Peace alone, he managed to become possibly the greatest director of all time with just one movie. But then I'm talking about Napoleon here, and Napoleon, his influence was like, again, he influenced the law system. He came from the French Revolution, and I guess without the French Revolution, we wouldn't have had the history of Napoleon. We wouldn't have had the Napoleonic Empire. And without the French Revolution, if you think a lot about it, we wouldn't have War and Peace, and we wouldn't have this movie. So one good thing, I guess you could say one good thing we got from the French Revolution is it led to the creation of many amazing films, such as Napoleon, well, I wouldn't say the 2023 one. Napoleon, War and Peace. Like, it's amazing. You don't get films like this today. Like, sure, I still think Denis Villeneuve is a great example of how filmmakers should work today. They display artistry. And even though he used a lot of CGI in the film CGI is so impressive that it looks practical. And that's why I love the Dune movies and think they're the best sci-fi films, best modern sci-fi films of all time. And Dune Part 2 is one of my top two and sci-fi movies of all time as well. I don't know if it's number one or number two because it's interchangeable between 2001: A Space Odyssey and Dune Part 2, but who knows? And if I think about it, there might be a few small problems that might drop its score from like a 99 to like a 9.8, or maybe if I think about it more, I could bring the score to a 10 because they're pretty minor problems and they're actually pretty forgivable. But we're not talking about Dune, we're talking about Napoleon. Back to Napoleon. I guess I've said all I've needed to. Like, there's those great quotes that people made memes about last year. There's the Battle of Waterloo, which did lead to his downfall and the downfall of his empire. Napoleon's invasion of Russia did lead to his downfall, and I think that's perfectly captured in the War and Peace movie, which I will get to in part 3 soon, and in this film as well, like the large-scale battle sequences that people do not have the guts to make today. It's absolutely impressive. Like, filmmaking, I can analyze. There's so much more to unpack with films made before our modern era, because they had when you have less, like I said this before, when they had less, but they managed to make more because of their sheer dedication and drive to make art. Whereas today, people mostly just do it for money. Now, I'm not saying all movie corporations do this. No, there's a lot of directors that do it for the sake of art. And even if the film ends up being not that good, they still at least tried. Like Napoleon 2023, though it didn't end up being a really good film, at least I can see that they tried. Ridley Scott is still one of the greatest directors of all time. And, at least they tried. It's good to try, and sometimes you fall. Like Napoleon did, though I don't think... Don't aspire to be someone like Napoleon. You'd become a war criminal. Trust me, Napoleon was far from perfect. I wouldn't call him outright evil, though he definitely did some bad things for sure. Like Genghis Khan, I wouldn't call him one of the most evil people who ever lived. Though he did do some pretty bad things. I wouldn't say he's a good guy, but I wouldn't say he's absolutely evil. He did some good things. I mean, he mostly did some pretty evil things, like the brutal ways he defeated his enemies, but he also gave women rights. He was tolerable to religion and laws and other things. He did some good things for his people, but absolutely just still doesn't excuse some of the bad things he did. But anyways, back to Napoleon. Yeah, even though he did kind of have some good influence, like his invasion, the French Revolution, without his invasion of Russia, we wouldn't have War and Peace, the movie. I guess that's one positive. He then without his invasion of Russia, we wouldn't have Napoleon. Napoleon wouldn't have been inspired to write War and Peace, and the film would have never been adapted into the absolute masterpiece that is Sergei Bondarchuk's War and Peace, which again is on YouTube. If you want to watch it, search it up. If you can digest 7-hour movies, and I can digest 7-hour movies fine because I really like them long and meaty films, like films that you can unpack and analyze. I've said this before. The film has so much to analyze: the cinematography, the acting, and 300 characters, which is a lot. The most actors to, I think, like some of the highest amount of actors to ever be put to screen. Anyways, so Napoleon, this film shows us that even when they were in the earliest days of filmmaking, they still managed to make an absolute masterpiece of an epic that still holds up pretty well today despite being 97 years old. It's absolutely stunning film, and you would be absolutely surprised. Like, how you're thinking to yourself, how did they make this back then? Like, it's absolutely crazy. So thank you very much for watching. I will be back in part 3 where I discuss I'll be back in part 3 to discuss War and Peace. I might also discuss other films as well, but for now, thank you for tuning into this film, video, and partial history lesson. I might throw in a bit of history when talking about historical movies, like I did that with Lawrence of Arabia, which T.E. Lawrence is a great historical figure to analyze. So anyways, thank you for watching my video on Napoleon. Also, the content in our videos is kind of shaky, laggy. The audio isn't the best. It looks like a video from the 2000s, early 2010s, our videos, because we don't have the right equipment. But if our channel can hit 4,000 subscribers, then we will be able to monetize our content, start making money from our channel in order to get the right equipment to make our videos a lot more high quality. So if you're watching this, make sure to hit the subscribe button, and we'll be able to make more high quality content once we hit our current goal of 4,000 subs. So see you in the next video, where I talk about War and Peace. Prometheus, out.